So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. In my chronology, I talked about how things had changed under Nixon, how he'd gone from one type of society to another, and then I will track what happened in criminal law during those 5 decades. But that brings us to date where we get a truck driver doing 100 and some odd years for driving a runaway truck without an anchor or something. I don't understand quite what the charges are, but to me, it's inconceivable that a traffic accident would yield 100 years in penitentiary time for a Mexican truck driver who's an employee of a trucking company, particularly a young one that hasn't that much experience, coming from a flatland country, maybe not used to driving down mountain passes, but that's a different subject. What happens is we've got, a couple decades ago, we started having statutes named after certain events or certain people, like Dorothy's Law, Jimmy's Law, whatever. We also had mandatory sentencing crop up because they decided it was too tough for judges to make decisions, and they came up with what they called a matrix for sentencing, where it would appear that any idiot with an adding machine can sentence a criminal defendant. And at the time, a bunch of us questioned, why are we paying judges all this money when anybody with an adding machine could do the sentencing and they don't have to make these hard decisions anymore? But I've never known a judge that really likes making hard decisions anyway. Then we get things like abuse of the elderly, and that kept getting amended so that no matter what happened to the person, if he happened to be over a certain age or had a disability, then the sentence was increased because of that, because we owe a greater obligation to elderly. I won't disagree with that, but I would disagree with the fact that arbitrarily and capriciously it becomes an element of a defense whether or not the offender knows the infirmary or disability or the age restriction. It was always questionable about the crime of statutory rape, because some of these young ladies, particularly from hippie days on, looked a lot older than what they were, and the mores had changed. But some young person who was theoretically a day older than another person when they had sex might get a mandatory prison sentence because the one was over 18 or whatever the age of consent was in that state and the other one wasn't. So it gets real complicated when you start doing these random things in order to prove a point. In any event, I talked about the old man's daughter who tried to protect her father from a gold digger, and referred to me by a pastor who could see what was obviously going on. But the district attorney's office couldn't, and what happened is the old man lost his caregiver and the gold digger got the ranch, so to speak. We have another one where what's happening is we're administering law and administering cases rather than actually investigating and doing what's necessary to determine whether or not there's a crime and whether or not the person should be prosecuted and things like this. And this case was really hard for me. It's a case that I've heard about since I retired. The defendant in the case worked for me for many years as an investigator. He helped expose the heroin ring run by the government, where they were stuffing heroin into corpses out of Vietnam, shipping the caskets to Travis Air Force Base in California, and then up to Albuquerque, the base there, Sandia Base, or the other one, Kirtland, and then to Santa Fe and up the San Luis Valley and into Pueblo for distribution. It was one of the major scandals of the Vietnam War, along with the sergeants that were skimming off the various clubs. In any event, this case was really a big case. I got picked up by the security forces of the Air Force and interrogated. I got shot at in Santa Fe while I was involved in this case, and my investigator has suffered a few minor harassments also. But the latest one is, well, the other thing is that he and I have been working on police corruption for a number of years, and some of the subjects that have been helping us have been organized crime subject and various officers of the Central Intelligence Agency and other agencies that are helping to clean them up. So generally speaking, when I hear something like this, I can get it out on a network and at least get an investigation going of some sorts. So this guy who had been my investigator has retired. And one of the reasons he retired, outside of age, is the fact that he's had brain surgery a few times because of growths inside the brain. He's handicapped. Sometimes he can't speak. He pretty much has to read lips to understand what people say. And he has stroke-like symptoms and doesn't understand a lot and has to have things repeated to him sometimes. He was probably the brightest investigator I've ever had. His IQ is way over 120. And he speaks sign language and Spanish and English and has all kinds of good talents like that. He also has seminars, and he runs a institute based on the teachings of Virginia Satir, who's a psychologist. He does family reconstructions, and he lives in a small mountain community west of here. So one night he discovers a burglar in his office, and occasionally weird things happen to him for some of his various activities. Anyway, 2 nights after the burglary, he is sitting in his living room and looks out the window and sees somebody out there taking pictures of his house. Now, he's handicapped, he's in a wheelchair, he has a hard time hearing, has a hard time speaking, although his mind functions pretty well if he can understand or see what he needs to in order to communicate. So there's a caregiver that he has through social services that comes to make sure he can get in bed and do various things that people that with disabilities have to do, and take his medication and his some other of his needs. I'm not real certain what all he needs, but he asks the caregiver to go outside and find out why this person is taking pictures. Well, the caregiver comes in and says it's a woman. She's taking pictures because she works for an insurance company and they want pictures. Well, my friend says, ask her to come in so I can see what she's doing and talk to her. The woman taking pictures comes into the house, and he tells her that he doesn't give permission for the house to be photographed. He doesn't want the house to be photographed. and requests that the pictures on her camera, actually in this case her cell phone, be erased. She refused, and he said, well, let me see the pictures. And she held her cell phone up, and this is where the stories vary. She claims that he grabbed her, and he was so powerful, she hurt because of his powerful grip, and that it caused pain, and there was a little bleeding from where he grabbed her. His thought, well, that's bullshit. The caretaker and he both believe that she probably hit her hand on the end of the table as she was pulling away and not making the camera available to him. In any event, while that was going on, the caregiver called the Netherlands Police Department and said there was an altercation going on. Could they please come to the residence? Well, on the way to the residence, they bumped into this lady who happened to be 77 years old, or 70-something years old, I forget exact age. And she was in her Mercedes, crying and shaking, and they stopped to talk to her, and she said she had just been at my friend's house, and he attacked her, and she was just taking some pictures, and she was real fearful, and she hurt, and things like that. So she showed her hand. Well, I don't know about her, but I have little bruises on my hand because of blood thinners and my age and things like that. And occasionally I'll bump my hand and it'll start bleeding. And I don't even know I bumped my hand. So personally, I questioned that story just from my own experience. But I doubt very seriously if an under 30-year-old district attorney or deputy district attorney would think of those things because he hasn't had the experience. Very few of them have the experience because they get to a certain age and they retire because they get 30 years of work in with the Colorado Civil Service and they can retire. Well, that's not the age of blood thinners and other medications, but sometimes they had parents that have this happen to them. I just don't know in this case. In any event, after interviewing the lady and putting a Band-Aid on her, they go to my friend's, my client, my investigator's house and talk to him. Now already they're prejudiced. They've seen a lady bleed who said she was hurting a lot and that the next interviewee was a monster and she couldn't get away and she was fearful and all this other prejudicial bullshit. So they go to his house, they interview him. Then they give him a summons to go to court. The summons is defective or screwed up in some event. They go up there and give him another summons, and then they tell him that they're going to write him up for assault on an elderly. I think he was older than the victim, but it's an assault on the elderly because she said she was in pain and that there was bleeding. Well, first off, it's questionable whether she was assaulted, and anybody evaluating a case would look at that. And I will tell you frankly, I can't think of a civil attorney, somebody that does civil cases or tort cases or accident cases, that, unless he's really starving, would take a case like this on a contingency fee representing the woman. But the state of Colorado has got another thing called victims' compensation, where they don't really investigate. If they take jurisdiction over a case and the person's injuries, they just file a claim for him, and the district attorney's office extorts it from the defendants. And it's really kind of ironic because since they abolished criminology as such and replaced it with a watered down academic thing called criminal justice, the young people studying criminal justice have no idea exactly what a crime is because they don't study crime, they study how to lock up more people. Now that's a sort of a sarcastic aside, but it's true. In any event, there was some sort of hurt, but there's no evidence of any damage, no evidence of any permanent damage, and there would be nothing in it for a civil lawyer to file a tort claim against a woman because he wouldn't make any money. But DAs don't have to make money. All they need to do is cost people money. So in any event, they go up to my ex-client, my investigator's residence, and write him a ticket. And the ticket is for assault on an elderly. And assault on an elderly carries a mandatory sentence, I believe, or it could. But it's a third-class felony. And the second tape shows when they tell him he's doing that, they're doing that, he's demanding to be arrested. He'll go ahead and take me in. You're going to... the cops don't arrest him because I don't think they want thousands of dollars in hospital bills and doctor bills just to arrest somebody to make a point. Now, the guy has no transportation. He's dependent upon the state to get transportation, and he's 30 miles from a courthouse. He has strokes and has to be assisted by ambulance. If he falls on the floor, the ambulance company or the fire department has to come and pick him up because he can't lift himself up. And there's documentation of this, but which to my knowledge, the district attorney hasn't checked into yet, because they're just taking the video of the one so-called victim and they're prosecuting. Now, I do know if an attorney worked for me and operated that way, I'd fire his ass immediately. You don't file a lawsuit without doing due diligence and checking the facts out. And here you've got people you could interview that say he can't get up off the floor, he can't do this. It's on record various places. It'd be very easy to check. But the investigator came in on the second or third interrogation, and he wasn't in his wheelchair. He was sitting in another chair, and she asked him how he got it from his wheelchair to the other chair, and he said he could get it with the assistance of people. He could do this, that, or the other. She didn't go into whether he could get up off the ground or the nature or extent of his disability. They just made the tape and produced the tape in such a manner that the viewer would assume that the alleged perpetrator was mobile and capable of doing the things that the alleged victim claimed. I would think that'd be malpractice, but I think the district attorney's office has other priorities. So now the guy is charged with a third-class felony. He has no money. He's on Social Security. He's got a disability. He has caretaker people taking care of him, and the district attorneys had him go to court like 3 or 4 different times on this case and are not relaxing their desire for prosecuting. They act like they're going to require a felony plea of some sort of this person. They're extorting him. And what happens that they don't realize is that some people with limited income are really stressed over court costs, supervision fees, and things like that the state never used to have to charge for, because previous state administrators knew that one of the major causes of crime was poverty, or people not having money. Believe it or not, they knew that some people went out and stole because they needed to live. So the government, in their infinite wisdom after Nixon, decided we should add punishment to the impoverished by putting a lot of costs on various things that they can convict people of. So, for instance, they have a surcharge on marijuana cases. They have extra charges on other types of crime. They have restitution that the criminal has to make. So imagine somebody robbing to have food or whatever, and they get caught and they write a bad check or they steal or something, and they're on minimum income, and all of a sudden they're tagged with a 20,000 or 200,000 or whatever victims compensation judgment, and they have to go to work to pay the victims compensation money, and they were depressed beforehand, like they're not going to get depressed much more now. I mean, that's really stupid. But anyway, back to the point. This investigator is more disabled than the elderly person that he was accused of assaulting. If in fact there were an assault, what good is it going to do to put this cripple into a prison cell where the state is going to have to pay for his next brain tumor operation or stroke or broken bone or anything, or when a guard in a prison is going to have to go to the guy's cell to pick him up because he can't get up. That doesn't show malpractice to me. That shows incompetence on the part of the district attorney's office. But that's another matter too. Anyway, I'm going to put the interviews on the next segment of this, and I hope some of you will call me and tell me what your thoughts are. Better yet, call the district attorney's office in Boulder, Colorado, and tell them what your thoughts are there, because this type of shit shouldn't happen, and maybe we can do something about it. It shouldn't happen any more than the truck driver receiving a 100-year sentence for a truck accident, even though it involves somebody dying, because the statute says this, that, or the other. I mean, we look at our history under common law, and William Penn would never have been able to get Pennsylvania had the jury not nullified his prosecution for some sort of religious crime of not belonging to the Church of England. This just isn't done. And it's done in a police state, and we're not a police state. We're supposed to be based on justice, and we're supposed to base our decisions on justice, on facts concerning the environment in which a person lived and what kind of person he is, not whether he did an offense that pissed somebody off and once a criminal, always a criminal, etc. So I hope you respond to this and the next segment. Thank you very much. This is Dennis signing off.